This evening, we are joined by Andrew Bolton. Andrew Bolton is going to speak to us about the difference between religion and spirituality. I feel so lucky to get to sit in on this session. I don't usually get to attend session as an event organizer. So thank you, Andrew, for being here. I'm going to give him a little introduction, and then I'm going to hand it over to him. Um, yeah, so I think that's all the reminders I had noted down. Let's just go ahead and get started. Andrew Bolton, is what I am looking for religion or spirituality? Andrew Bolton taught multi-faith religious education in a comprehensive state school in Leicester. Is it Leicester? Okay, thank you. All my UK friends would have hung me up if I should have checked ahead of time. Andrew Bolton taught multi-faith religious education in comprehensive state school in Leicester, one of the most diverse cities in Europe. He was a teacher trainer at Westminster College, Oxford, and was an educational advisor for Leicester Education Department. Jewell Bolton did her master's degree in human relations at Nottingham University and was a primary school teacher. They have 2 sons and 2 grandchildren. They live in Independence, Missouri, when Andrew worked for Community of Christ in Peace and Justice Ministries and then in Asia. They returned to Leicester after retirement and currently work together in the Leicester Schools Peace Project and down the allotment. Andrew, it is all yours. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you, Grace, for doing all the clever technical stuff. So let's start with the PowerPoint. So is what I'm looking for religion or spirituality? Can you be thinking about that question? And we're going to ask you to brainstorm your thoughts and feelings, first of all, about religion, and then about spirituality. Just a minute, I'm too fast. So we're going to invite you to brainstorm these 2 topics, religion and spirituality. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and I'm inviting you on the chat to put your word or feeling in, and Grace will share her screen and put those words in, and she'll shout them out. So let's start with religion. What are your feelings and thoughts when you hear the word religion?
Give folks a minute to find their. The chat should be open on Zoom. I'm also watching on Facebook, so if you're watching wherever you're watching. Okay, chat's disabled. I don't know. We've had some issues with chat yesterday. Thank you, Karen. So you can put them in the Q&A, and I can watch there as well. Thank you, Karen. Jane on Facebook says dogma.
Thank you. Keep
Anonymous says doctrine.
Other thoughts or feelings?
Rules from Kathy. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy.
Oh, Karen says a lot to be responsible for, not always positive, maybe responsibilities. Wow.
Okay, thank you, Karen.
Think of tradition.
Okay.
Set of beliefs from Jewell.
Thank you, Jewell.
Jane pointed out my typos. Really lovely, Jane. Thank you so much. Building so much confidence. I love that for us.
Okay, that's a beginning. We can come back in a minute. Let's now brainstorm spirituality. So, feelings and thoughts about spirituality. I'm really interested in what you're thinking, feeling when you hear this word.
I think of creativity when I think of spirituality.
Very good.
Jewell says an inner sense of God.
Okay, that's good.
Awe and wonder from Kathy. Oh, I love that.
Yeah. Thank you, Kathy.
Curiosity from
Oh,
Naomi.
thank you, Naomi.
Personal from Claire. Thank you, Claire.
Yes. Any more?
Karen, I'm gonna copy and paste yours, Karen. I'm not typing out. Connecting with a divine presence, either on my own or on a group from Karen.
Thank you, Karen. So connecting.
Sarah says, not always anything to do with God, peace, and nature. So maybe it could be diverse.
So she's coming back to religion here, is it?
I think that's for, oh, sorry. That's me. Nope, that's over here. Thank you. I wouldn't have noticed that. Victoria says peace of mind.
Ah, very good, Victoria. Okay. So can you show both together?
Yeah, sorry, Claire said personal. I missed this one. Claire said personal.
Yeah, so you got it above. So can you put yes, thank you. So is one side more creative than more positive than the other? I think you were able to say more things about spirituality, and they're positive, I think.
Mm.
Okay. And then with the religion, dogma, doctrine, rules, responsibilities, tradition, set of beliefs. So, and then with spirituality, creativity, inner sense of God, awe and wonder, curiosity, personal, connecting with the holy, I would say, to summarize, not always anything to do with God, peace, nature, diverse, peace of mind, and personal again. So very good. So the two are separate, are different experiences, and we're going to be exploring that. So if we change out now, and I'll go back to my PowerPoint. So we've seen what we've done. Was it a surprise for anybody? Did you anticipate spirituality perhaps being more positive than religious experience, than religion? It's obvious from what we've saw that spirituality perhaps is more positive. What can we learn from this exercise? Well, they're perhaps two different things. So let's look at religion for a moment to uh, describe it. So when I think of religion, I think of organized or trying to organize, being organized. It's institutional. Um, it has history for multiple generations sometimes, the tradition that was mentioned. There are rules and expectations. We agree on that. There are authorities and there are members. If we look at spiritual, we've had mentioned spirit and connection with others, and also perhaps nature and creation. And I want to suggest that spiritual is more movement than institutional. Okay, so religion and spiritual may be different. Now I want to introduce you to Martin Buber, an Austrian Jewish philosopher and existentialist. So I first heard of Martin Buber when I attended an optional class when I was learning how to be a teacher in Swansea. And this lecturer talked about Martin Buber, and I didn't understand a word he said. But he said this about Martin Buber, and this is the only thing I remember. He's the most important philosopher of the 20th century. So I put that away and I followed up with Buber later. So he's an existentialist. Um, Jean-Paul Sartre was a French existentialist. Martin Buber was an Austrian existentialist. And here is his dates, 1878 to 1965. So he lives through World War One, World War Two. He survives the Holocaust by escaping to Palestine in 1938. Now then, for Jean-Paul Sartre, hell is other people. But Buber's very sociable. And if I was to put the contrast, other people are heaven for Martin Buber. He likes people. So this is something he's got going for him. And you see he's smiling in this picture. He's perhaps the happiest person in the picture. And I love this picture as well, the interaction between Buber and a young girl. And even I can tell hidden in that beard is a wonderful smile that the girl is responding to with also a smile. So she's happy, she looks relaxed, she feels secure. Um, and I heard a story from my father-in-law of now an old woman who met Buber when she was around 8 years old. And she said it was an unforgettable experience. So the first point I want to make is that Buber likes people, liked people. So he wrote a wonderful book called I and Thou, Ich und Du in German. It's in German first, 1923, just after World War One. And there's a whole lot of stories behind this book. His friendship with Gustav Landau, which ended in a big row in the middle of the war. But they still remain friends. And I think I and Thou is partly to do with his friendship with Buber, with Gustav Landau and others. So I and Thou. And the best advice I had before I started reading it was, Andrew, read it like it's poetry. Now he's a philosopher, but if you read up about him, he writes too well to be a philosopher. So with poetry, you savor the words, you reflect, you reread, you go back, you think about it. You marvel at the artistry of the words. You're caught up in something that's beyond yourself. So that was really good advice for me. And so I and Thou, the book I and Thou is like that. And in this book, he describes two kinds of relationships, I, thou, and I, it. So let's look at this I, thou thing a little bit more. So there are two forms of you in German. Sie is the word, the you form that you would use if you were being polite, if you were being formal, if you're speaking to your social betters. And then du is familiar. That's with intimate relationships. It's the word you would use in family or with friends. And marvelously, also in German, this is how you address God. You use the word du. Now, in English, in older English, we have these same two forms. You have you, which you use for your social betters, and thee and thou that you used with family and also in English with God. So you see that in the King James Version. So two kinds of you. We drop thee and thou. We call everybody you now. But I'm going to stick with thee and thou. And in French, you have vous and tu, and in Spanish, usted and tu. So I'm sorry for the grammar lesson, but that's the most difficult part of the presentation. So what is I, thou, and I, it? We're going to look at three biblical stories now for a moment. The woman caught in adultery in John chapter 8, the Good Samaritan in Luke 10, and Jesus and two thieves crucified at the end of all four Gospels. So in the chats now, where are the I-thou relationships and where are the I-it relationships? And just say what in the chats or the question and answer, and Grace will read those out for me.
I'll say Jane also on Facebook, she dropped the link to purchase the that book if you want to grab it, I Am Thou by Buber. It's in the comments on Facebook. Thank you, Jane.
So what are the I-thou relationships in this story? What are the I-it relationships in this story?
Can you start us with an example, maybe?
So the relationship between the crowd of men and the woman, is that I-thou or I-it?
You've stumped him. It was too much grammar lesson. Jane says the woman is definitely not part of the group. She's other. The group of men do not see her as I.
They don't see her as thou. They see her as an it. They're about to stone her, and they're asking Jesus whether he would consent and enforce the law of Moses by stoning somebody caught in the very act of adultery.
Kathy
So,
says crowd and sin is I.
okay. So the woman is the it. But what's Jesus's relationship with the woman? Is that I
Jewell,
or I it?
Jewell says Jesus speaks to both the crowd and the woman as thou.
Thank you, Jewell. So, and her lover, it seems to me that he was part of a setup. The lover of the woman has treated her as an it also, and he's not here. The law says in the Torah that both should be stoned. Anyway, Jesus prevents the stoning by saying, he without sin throw the first stone, and beginning with the oldest, they all went away. So the Good Samaritan story, let me remind you of the story in Luke 10. Somebody's mugged on the road to Jericho, a Jew, and he's left injured, and a Levite walks by and doesn't stop. A priest walks by and doesn't stop to help. The Samaritan walks by and stops and aids the wounded man, takes him to the hotel and pays the hotel some money and says, if you're out in anything, I will pay you when I return. So where's the I-thou relationship? Where's the I-it relationship in this story?
While folks think about that and type their answers, Kathy brought up a really excellent point that I think is about the previous scenario. She says, am I going to be difficult if I disagree and say the crowd aren't seeing the woman, only the sin, hence the sin being it? So in her answer, she said the sin is I it, the crowd versus the sin. I think that's really interesting that they that perspective, that they've taken the humanity out of that human woman altogether and they only see her as a sin. It says,
Yes,
similarly, the Jewish leaders aren't seeing the wounded man only the potential of becoming unclean.
yes. Or they feel afraid of also being mugged, is a more kind interpretation of this story. The I-thou relationship exists between the Samaritan and the Jew, right? He sees the humanity of the wounded Jewish person on the road. So It's a moving story. Remember, Jews and Samaritans didn't get on. This is like a black stopping for a white person. Okay, now we come to this horrible scene. What's the relationship between the three crucified? Remember the two thieves? One's mad with Jesus, the other has a connection with Jesus. Then the soldiers who've just crucified these three men, and then the priests that are jeering. Not in the scene are the women. They've been left out of this picture, but they're women followers of Jesus. So can you share the I, thou, and I, it relationships here?
Give folks a second to type. Jewell says about the last slide, the two ministers ignore the pain and move quickly away. The wounded man is an it to them.
Going back to the
To the previous slide. Yeah, I don't want to ignore anybody.
thank you. So if you're crucified, you're definitely an it.
Yeah.
The soldiers see the three so-called criminals as its, and the Jewish leaders that are jeering Jesus see Jesus as an it. The women see him as thou, hurting. So this is a terrible it scene, but there are those that are exercising thou. If we come to the empty tomb 2 days later, and the women discover the empty tomb, is this I, thou, or I, it? A dead body is an it.
Mm.
This is full of thou-ness, although you can't see anything. Okay, so let's come back to Martin Buber. He says the basic word I, thou, so I hyphen thou, he's calling a word, can be spoken only with one's whole being. The concentration and fusion into a whole being can never be accomplished by me, can never be accomplished without me. I require a thou to become. Becoming I say thou. In other words, I think Martin Buber is saying, for me to be a person, I need another person. I can't be a person without another person. So he's saying this in his poetic language. So John Macquarie, commenting on Buber and I thou-ness, says, a genuine relation to another person cannot be one-sided, dominating, or possessive. It must consist in openness and willingness to listen and receive as well as to speak and to give. So an I-thou relationship is a genuine relationship that's not domineering, but it involves openness, willingness to listen and receive as well as to speak and give. You're getting the idea what's I, thou, and I, it. So think of a relationship in which you felt loved, a full person, authentic, and at the end of your encounter with that person, you felt full of dignity. That's an I, thou relationship. Now think of a relationship in which you felt a thing, an object. You felt used, manipulated, or exploited. That's a relationship of I, it. I, thou, I, it. Okay, so is spirituality I, thou, or I, it? Can you put that in the question and answer?
I, thou from Jewell. I think I thou as well. I think lots of our brainstorm um, was based around sort of the personal control you have in a situation with spirituality. I would say I thou as well.
Yes, the fact that a person was used twice, right?
Yeah, personal was used twice. Inner sense of God was used. It's more about inward reflection.
Yes,
Naomi says I thou.
thank you, Naomi. And there's connection. The word connection was used.
Yes.
Okay, so very good. So religion, is this I thou or I it or both?
I think this is one that will vary person to person, circumstances to circumstances too, depending on
Yeah.
folks' relationship with, their history of religion. Jane says it depends.
Okay, very good, Jane. The list, if I remember, was about tradition, rules, dogma.
Dogma, doctrine, responsibilities.
Is that I thou or I it?
Naomi says it can be both.
Okay, okay. This is an advanced group. Thank you. Okay,
Jewell says if done well and sensitively, it can be both I thou. It can be I thou.
okay. So what's your experience of church? I thou or I it? And uh, just put that again in the question and answer.
Jane says it varies minute to minute.
Okay, very good, Jane. So it varies, right? So let's go through some details here. So the sense of community in a religion, is that I thou or I it? I'll go through this list and then we'll have a discussion. Um, worship in nature and outdoor worship, is that I thou or I it? Worship in the temple, is that I thou or I it? Ritual, do you feel an it in ritual? Do you feel a thou in ritual? Or can it be either? A bishop's interview, is this a pastoral experience or do you feel an it? Scripture, what's your experience of scripture or the way it's been taught to you? Has scripture been used to make you feel a thou or an it? Stereotyping, all Catholics are apostate. All Community of Christ folk are definitely apostate.
I'm going to clip that soundbite for our TikTok channel. Sorry, Andrew.
Institution. In an institution, are you a thou or an it? Creed and dogma. Is truth being expressed in creed and dogma. Do you feel an it or a thou? Fellowship. Is this an I thou experience or an I it experience, or does it vary? And then church court. Is that I thou or I it? Or can it be sometimes both? The first vision. Did Joseph experience I thou-ness? Buber says that truth is found not in creed or dogma or books, but through encountering others.
Can I read out some comments from the last list?
Yeah, yes.
We've got a few comments. Some about personal experiences. Jewell says when she was told off at a religious class in Sydney, it was I, it. Um, Kathy, something similar, variable. When in agreement with what leaders require, it can feel like the first, meaning I, thou. But when there's disagreement and no room for discussion, suddenly you're banging your head. So it's sort of in alignment with variable and depending on circumstances. And I think it depends on sort of your placement in that hierarchy of church and an institution. Anonymous would like more time to type. Thank you. I'll be less afraid of some dead air. And Kathy says, ritual can be spiritual, but some rituals are a better match for people than others.
Yeah, yes. I know some people are profoundly moved by liturgy.
Hmm.
Well chosen, beautiful words.
Oh, ritual. Sorry. I don't,
Yeah.
that's my pronunciation. Ritual, she said.
Any other comments? I went too fast. I apologize.
Jane says, if there's someone trying to control the community or ritual or interview, there's a power dynamic, even if it's benevolent.
It's an I it in that situation.
Hmm.
Okay, that's very good. But did anybody say anything about the first vision?
Not yet.
Let me pause a moment and see if people want to respond to that. Okay, people are still perhaps thinking. Okay, so for Buber, truth is found in I thou, in encounter. Too often people have thought of truth as something they possess, which they must beat the unconverted over the head with. uh, Such a relationship is the one-way I-it relationship. So is it possible to have an I-thou relationship in a religion? I'm going to suggest yes, providing that you protest being made an it and yet treat the other as a thou in our protest. So I think protest is asserting our thou-ness. And it can change the situation when we treat the other person as a thou rather than as an it. So protest is holy when it's a protest about being dehumanized.
Mm.
So Buber says this, every thou must become an it. He says it in these words. But this is the exalted melancholy of our fate, that every thou in our world must become an it. Sounds a bit pessimistic and sad, doesn't it? So I want to ask, well, Buber describes one example of this happening in his own life, his relationship with a horse that began as pure thou, and it felt very special. And then he was caught up in the sensuality of stroking the horse's neck and mane. And the horse didn't respond as it had responded before. And he said he felt ashamed and guilty that he used the horse for his own personal satisfaction, as it were. The magic was gone. So, can I thou become I it? Is this what happens in a relationship between two people? Is this what happens in a marriage? That I thou becomes I it? Or there are cycles of this? Is this what happens in church? That it begins I thou, but then becomes I it? We're going to have a bigger discussion in a minute. So can we live in the world of I it and enter I thou, go from I it to I thou? So Buber says yes. The particular it, by entering the relational event, may become a thou. So I love the story of Silas Marner by George Eliot. So Silas Marner is a weaver, and he becomes preoccupied with making as much money as possible. He becomes a miser, and he has his hoard of gold sovereign coins that he takes out and counts. He's completely obsessed with possessing these coins. And then one day they're stolen, and is utterly gutted by their loss. And then the story goes on, and a little child crawls into his weaving room and has a mass of curly ginger hair. And his sight is beginning to fail at this point, and he thinks he's found his gold coins again. And he reaches out to touch the gold coins and finds these curls of hair and the squeal of a baby. And he somehow adopts the baby, looks after the baby, and it transforms him as a human being, because his I-it relationship with gold coins becomes an I-thou relationship with this child. So I love that story. You can go from I-it to I-thou. And then Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. Lizzie and Darcy are into I-it big time. They hate each other. But it ends very happily as they discover thou in each other and get married. So, Jesus, it's a lovely picture, isn't it, of encounter between the two, the smile on the child's face. Is Jesus pure thou? So, thus, truth is encountered between I and thou. And he goes on to say that in every thou, the eternal thou is present, can be glimpsed. There's something more. The thou may be a Buddhist, a Christian, a Muslim, a Jew, even a Mormon, or an atheist, but is always a person in the interaction, in the encounter. One of my very best teachers was an atheist, who was so committed to me and other students, always humanizing, always encouraging, always supporting. So God's Spirit, I wonder if God's Spirit is personness and present in joy and love in every I-thou relationship, the magic of the relationship. Is I-thou sacramental? There's something more. So discussion. I'm going to stop sharing and invite you to make your comments.
We've got one from Jane about the first vision. It's a little bit of a callback, but she says the first vision, you asked if it was an I, thou, or an I. She says she doesn't know. She'd have to ask Joseph. Jane's hilarious, but I also think that's a very interesting perspective. Some people I think would look at that situation and say, obviously it's an I, thou, and depending on other people's relationship with that history might have a different answer.
But Jane's thought Jane's answer is very, very thoughtful. You don't know unless you ask, right?
Yeah.
So his first a first account that he wrote in his own hand, 1831 or 32, he says, "I was filled with love for many days afterwards." So that's hinting, I think, at I thou. But thank you, Jane.
And then Kathy says, people come to be viewed as cogs in a machine with concern only as to the smooth running of the whole, and no concern for the particular well being of the individual. To be concerned for the individual means that we need to accept less than perfect functioning of the institution.
Thank you, Kathy. Well spoken as an engineer.
I love that that speaks to an intentional placement of I thou. It's a choice you have to make as opposed to something that just happens, right? There's an intentionality behind making that decision to see others in your sphere as an I thou, even if uh, for efficiency's sake, others would prefer an I it relationship.
Yes. Other thoughts, questions, comments?
Jane says, uh, Joseph, and we can claim an I thou. It may be so, but it's complicated when I don't really know how honest they are. I can choose to believe, but I'll only really know my own viewpoint.
Mm. Very thoughtful. Thank you.
Karen says, I'm struggling to see that there is any pattern in this. Whatever the place is, surely it's the nature of the interaction that determines its label.
Yes.
When working with children and young people, it's important to look in their eyes. Connection is more important than order. Oh, that's from Jewell. The first is from Karen about the nature of the interaction, and Jewell says about connection being more important than order.
Yes. Jill's very good at connection with children. And Karen's right that it depends. I mean, I thou-ness can interrupt what's going on,
Mm.
and I it can happen very quickly in a situation that was I thou. Okay, so I don't want to drag this out. I think Buber can be helpful in our spiritual journey. Our analysis of a religious institution, a way of being able to think about how I might respond when I'm feeling treated it as a cog in a religious community rather than a person in a religious community. I think it's very empowering to think of behind every thou is the eternal thou. That God somehow is present. I love that phrase, that verse in Genesis, that Genesis chapter 1, that all humans are made in the image of God. So there's a connection with Martin Buber's Judaism here. I think he's thought very carefully and long about that verse in chapter 1 of Genesis. And then the world of it, if you're being bombed, if you're being oppressed, if you're being marginalized, you're experiencing I-itness. And you should revolt and protest that creatively, as the children of Israel did by walking out of the relationship to go to the promised land of I-thou-ness, to leave the world of slavery and its I-itness. And Zion, I think, is a world in which I-thou-ness is victorious. And I leave you with the thought of, or the question, is Jesus pure I-thou-ness? And is crucifixion therefore inevitable? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrew. That was beautiful. I feel so lucky that I got to sit. Like I said, I don't often get to attend sessions as someone that works behind the scenes, and I feel so lucky I got to be here with you today. Thank you so much for being here. Okay, we'll let everybody go. We'll see you in another hour. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you, Grace.